Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Asher here. You're somebody that's been in the footwear space for quite some time, and you've had an incredible impact on the category. I mean, you've been able to pioneer almost a new style of footwear, one that's really barefoot, that puts you in touch with the ground and is probably the most natural way to wear shoes there is. I mean, you've really designed something that takes away any of the issues of potentially being barefoot, but gives you that feeling of being barefoot. And people love this. They've got an incredible experience that's just very different, and it feels like how shoes should be made. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Very excited to be here, and yeah, thanks, Ben, and yeah, looking forward to answering whatever questions you've got about my journey to now.
Awesome. So just kind of going all the way back to the beginning, how did your interest in the world of footwear and wanting to make shoes and wanting to be in kind of design, like how did that passion of yours start?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm actually from a long line of shoemakers. I'm actually a seventh generation Clark is my dirty secret, but I wasn't born on the factory floor. In fact, my dad was a little bit of a black sheep, kind of creative actor. And so the way I ended up in footwear, a large part of that, I guess, must have been in my genes. Um, but I was born barefoot and grew up on the coast and spending a lot of my formative years without shoes on. But like most people, born in the 80s or whatever, I kind of lived through the epitome of some of the sexiest, most exciting shoe brands of yesteryear, with the emergence of, Nike Air Max and Reebok pumps and all of this, this incredible kind of underfoot technology linked to the mega athletes and the incredible storytelling of these brands in the late 80s, early 90s. And whilst I grew up in a humble town of Somerset in southwest England, my mum's Canadian, so
Uh,
we used to go to Canada in our kind of hippie jumpers and our ripped jeans, and our kind of vulcanized daps. And my grandparents, the first thing they would do is take us to this shop called Sporting Life, which was, like a cathedral of EVA and petrochemical, sweet-smelling foams and bright colors of these iterations of these now iconic shoe silhouettes. And I think it was kind of in those formative years that this connection of brand, performance, and design started to kind of synergize for me. I was really into skateboarding and surfing and sport and played it quite seriously in my formative years. So again, all those connections of popular culture, music, skateboarding, and the like search for Animal Chin and those videos and endless summer and surfing, and somehow it all connected to this moment around 2002. I was meant to go to fashion school, but wasn't, I think, ready, or kind of really my passion wasn't to send people down a catwalk. It was around function and performance, and footwear, again going back to my genes, was where it landed. And that's what I started studying doing. And I wanted to make sneakers, and I was surrounded by kind of classmates making high heels and things like that, so I was kind of, again, a bit the odd one out.
uh,
And yeah, started working for Kenzo whilst I was at college. And it was, again, to kind of plot a bit of a timeline, that was a moment when sport and fashion was coming together. So you had Yohji Yamamoto's first collection with Adidas, you had Mahara's first collection with Puma, and you had Prada Red Stripe. So I was really into that whole connection, and that really became my that area. And then I went on to set up a design agency, worked for lots of different brands, and after all of this searching, came back to the beginning and realized that the last doesn't come first, the foot does.
mm,
And there is an inherent evolutionary truth there, that millions of years of evolution have done an incredible job, and shoes get in the way of the natural function of the foot. And actually, we like to use this idea that, the best bit of technology to go into a shoe is the human foot. And that is that was a huge moment for me and my cousin, who's the co-founder of Vivo. There's lots of things that happened in and around that, but it was a huge Kool-Aid moment of like, this is not about the shoe at all. This is a deeper kind of evolutionary thing, and we have spent, probably the best part of 15 plus years trying to unlearn everything we know about shoemaking, backed on a big journey that we've gone on, understanding, biomechanics, kinetics, kinematics, shapes, forces, anatomy. Incredibly, you're not taught this at school, at shoe school, and incredibly hardly any shoe designers know anything about it, me included at that point. And so it was all of those things were really humbling light bulbs to go off, and that formed and became a kind of what crystallized Vivobarefoot, which is not about the shoe at all, and what can I say? Yeah, and it's got this kind of virtuous circle, right? Because we care a lot about sustainability, and that was always in the kind of DNA of what I was doing. But there's this really kind of elegant kind of, you could call it a Venn diagram, that the less shoe you make, the better it is for human movement and planetary health. And that's a wonderful kind of North Star that's kind of perhaps going to be more than our lifetime to get to, but ultimately the mission of the business.
How did the specific idea for we should make shoes like they're a barefoot experience happen? Like, I know you mentioned some of the different experiences you had, but like, when did you get to a point where you're like, okay, we're going to build a brand and a whole new type of shoe around this idea that it needs to be like a barefoot experience? What pushed that over the top to become your focus?
Yeah, so to be honest, that didn't come from me. And when you dig into it, nothing new is under the sun. But for us, the first touch point was a guy called Tim Brennan. He was a childhood friend of my cousin. His dad was a Pilates teacher and he was a tennis player. And he was a design student at the London College of Royal College of Art, and he kept twisting his ankle playing tennis, and he couldn't work out why he was twisting his ankle. And he looked at his shoes, and if you think of a shoe has a thick outsole on the bottom with ultimately a fulcrum edge. So if you're cutting left and right and you hit that fulcrum, you've got a pivot point, which you're a lot more likely to bust your ankle. That's also connected with not being able to feel the ground, so you don't know when that point is coming. So you're a lot less likely to turn your ankle barefoot than you are in a high stack shoe. Fact. Why? Because you can feel the ground, and also you're lower to the ground, right? You're zero. So he cut a bit of a Tinker Hatfield moment, kind of cut the sole off his shoe, stitched on a tennis racket cover, and came to my cousin with this idea and a bit of research around this, again, really interesting insight around proprioception, right? Or to break that down more simply, it's around sensory feedback. So your feet have the same amount of nerve endings in as your hands. Your hands are made to feel, so are your feet. And so he was like, look, the only way to make shoes is barefoot and with thin soles because they made a handful of prototypes and they all looked really ropey, and you'd be embarrassed if your dad picked you up from school in them. Cut a long story short, many moons later, there were a few other moments. We met a guy that really understood everything about evolutionary biology, and running mechanics, shapes, forces, barefoot, and it was that education linked with that we would suddenly just like, look, the only way to make footwear is for the human condition, and all footwear is having a really negative effect on human health, and that was the moment we sat down. I quit I shut down my agency. He shut down another business that he was running, and we bet the farm on Vivobarefoot.
So once you had this idea and you had this prototype and you saw the difference it could potentially make, how did you go from there to let's go and make some and get a final design done and actually get it out there and communicate the differences you had here and get people
Yeah, I
interested to
mean, so
buy
it was a
your
pretty
product?
rough prototype then, and frankly, for a handful of years, it existed as this kind of sub brand, making a few thousand pairs of shoes. They had a zip round the sole, a thin Kevlar rubber sole, and they were kind of quite funky looking products. And so when we really decided to go for it, that's when I kind of stepped in with, a handful of years under my belt. And my first thing was like, right, I want to make these products under these key design principles, effectively, wide to fit the foot, flexible, zero drop, and with a thin sole, look really cool, like something that I would wear. It was also around the moment when the book Born to Run, authored by Chris McDougall, a New York Times bestseller, which was this amazing emotional story of that we were born to run, and then the Harvard Professor Daniel Lieberman, an evolutionary kind of biologist, who came out with a peer-reviewed study about the running hypothesis, the persistent running hypothesis. And so that was kind of like the emotional, the rational moment that barefoot running happened first. And then we launched these first products that I worked on. And at that moment in time, Nike Free had a version, you had New Balance Minimus, and here we were, with the big guys at this moment in time. And, we thought we'd be kind of 4 or 5 years and we'd be able to kind of turn it into $1 billion business and go and do something else with our lives. But overnight successes generally aren't overnight successes. And here we are. When was that? 2010. So yeah, here we are, kind of a good number of years. No, 2012 that was. Yeah, so here we are, a good number of years later, and we've only just begun, really.
It
Take
takes
time.
time, definitely. So after you had this out there, I mean, like, how were you going and getting customers? Was this something that was like you were doing? I mean, this was earlier on to social media. Like, was this an ad you were trying to do ads, or were you just going out there and targeting people that were in maybe the running space? Like, how were you trying to convince people and even just get the word out there with a small
Yeah,
budget and just
man.
a
I mean,
couple
it's
guys building
it's the
this?
same story as all the kind of startups. It's trade shows, back of the car, going over to Asia with rolls of leather on your shoulder, begging third or fourth kind of C grade factories to make your product, drinking whiskey with the factory bosses, doing whatever it took to make your prototypes, get shoes to trade shows, and convince people that that this is the future. And I always say that ignorance is bliss, particularly as someone that's starting something up. You need a lot of ignorance and a hell of a lot of grit or stubbornness. So ignorance is that if I knew what I knew last year, I probably wouldn't have done last year. And grit is being stubborn minded enough that it doesn't matter what comes your way, you're kind of willing to walk through that wall. And for many, many years, everyone was like, look, you're ridiculous. The customer's not ready. The shoes look terrible. We need a bit of cushioning, everything that we knew you didn't. And I guess it helped that we were kind of in it together, and we made it to now. And of course, now's a very different world. It's not about running. It's part of a big natural health kind of movement of going back to the way we sleep, the way we eat, the way we move, and we're the below ankle kind of aspect to this new way of kind of living healthy. And obviously, the same with the way we make our shoes, and we've learned a lot. We're really, we where we're at right now, we call it kind of Vivo 3.0. So what I spoke to you about then was 1.0, and we've made it through a couple of close shaves, and we're in a pretty stable, growing position now, and we want to take it to the next level.
Asher, what have you learned most from a design standpoint about the human foot and just how to make the right kind of shoe to fit it in the best way, that's a natural feeling? What have you learned most since you started to where you are now? Like, how has the design
Well, yeah,
evolved?
as I'm here now, what have I learned the most is that what have I learned? I've learned that fundamentally, your feet are amazing bits of kit, and left to their own devices are totally capable, and a strong, healthy pair of feet is the foundation to strong, healthy movement. It's been that way for hundreds of thousands of years, right? They were designed that way for a reason, the same way that everything up the kinetic chain is designed that way. And your feet are a good analogy of what we were talking about earlier, is that, fundamentally we're starting to realize as humans that we need to get out of the way of ourselves a little bit. And the closer we can get back to natural principles, the better. So it kind of goes back again to that first thing, is the foot does come first. And anatomically, at a very simple level, that the shoe needs to be very flexible in all directions. The sole needs to be thin, and it needs to be foot shaped, to allow for to play a I want to say a supportive role, but it's not a support role at all. To play to allow that all to function, that I guess has brought me elegantly to where we are now. And I think I kind of share some of these elements, is that, tradition, feet are all functionally the same, but they're all different in shape. And so if you want to make the perfect shoes perfect for feet, doing that in an industrial one size fits all model is basically impossible. At a functional level, and then at a sustainability level, that shoemaking is almost the last bastion of industrialization, made with subtractive analog processes on the other side of the world, where you throw lots of labor at it. Subtractive, an interesting word, right? Because it's about subtracting. So the pre-production waste of cutting and all of this is significant. And so a handful of years ago, with that brief in mind, we went on a journey of scan to print and or additive manufacturing that starts with a foot scan. So, to a little bit hundreds of, tens of thousands of years ago, humans made shoes for protection from cuts and cold, but that's it, out of local materials for individuals. 10,000 years later, we need to make shoes locally for just a thin piece of protection. And so in some ways we're kind of using kind of technology to go back to how we've made footwear for a millennia, and that's where we're at now.
I do find that fascinating that, like, now it's kind of, we're bringing this trend that was old, kind of making it new again, and it's becoming more popular, and we're kind of seeing this in some other areas as well. Asher, just the last question I have: what do you aspire to do now? What are your short-term goals, your long-term goals? What's the big picture
vision? Is a connected kind of digital ecosystem. I know that's a bit of a buzzword, but yeah, we're opening up. We're primarily a direct-to-consumer business with strategic kind of wholesale and partners, but opening up now concept stores globally, UK, US, Germania, backed up by a kind of an enhanced kind of digital ecosystem that's not just flogging shoes, but starts with a foot scan linked to kind of transition advice, content, services like returning your shoes to be resold and dealt with our Revivo program, or tapping into kind of health advice on Vivo Health, and connecting a Vivo world of products, experiences, and services, to try and inspire people to go back to the advantages of living with a little bit less cushioning between ourselves and the wonderful planet that we all walk on.
Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time of doing this. I think you built something pretty amazing that is very innovative in a space that is definitely ready for a bunch of innovation on multiple different fronts. And it's important that people connect with the environment and the world in a way that's as natural as possible. And you guys are spearheading that. So I'm excited to see what's next.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Thanks for
Appreciate
coming
it.
on.